Welcome to Auditory Precision, and I'm going to be starting a video series on fitting, and this will be the first video, so it might be a little bit longer because I'm going to go over what I do before I even take the hearing aids out of the box. I want to explain to the patient what they might encounter in that first week, hearing those high frequencies and those low frequencies again. The reason for this is that normal hearing to your patient is, hearing loss. So bringing back hearing might sound a little abnormal in the beginning, and I always want to keep them realistic and show that I'm trustworthy. If they run into these situations and they bring it up on a follow-up, and I try to explain this on the back end of why that happened, it's really nothing more than an excuse. So the first thing I like to talk about is their own voice. Not only is their voice going to sound amplified, but it might even sound different to them. The reason for this is that when you're talking, not only do you hear sound leaving your mouth and go back into your ears, you're also hearing through your vocal cords. And if you've ever heard yourself recorded, say on an answering machine, you always say, "That doesn't sound like me. Do I really sound like that?" And everybody will say, "Yeah, you do." Because all they're hearing is what leaves the mouth and goes into the ears. Now, with our patients, it's kind of the opposite. What they've heard predominantly is their vocal cords. And now that we're bringing back the sound from their mouth back into the ears, it can sometimes sound like they're in an open room, or maybe like a voice on top of a voice. Now this is something that they should acclimate to, and I always tell them that reading out loud is a way to get this to become normal quicker. The other thing is those high frequencies. High frequencies are going to bring back things that they might have not even heard in years. Walking on tile floor, the blinker of their car, running water. And the thing with this is not only is it going to sound very crisp and bright, and maybe even a little artificial in the beginning, but it's also going to take a lot of their attention. When I hear myself walking on a tile floor, I know it's me walking and I can ignore it. But what happens when we start to bring back these sounds is we're starting to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. To explain this very briefly, the parasympathetic nervous system relaxes the body. The sympathetic nervous system will excite the body, and this creates a fight or flight situation. And so we're constantly going, what is that? Oh, it's just the newspaper. Oh, what is that? Oh, it's just the running water. And this is why I always suggest to wear the hearing aids around the house for the first couple of days. Going to a restaurant, you'll hear everything, but it'll be very hard to ignore all of these soft background noises and actually get to enjoy the conversation. So the one thing when I start my fitting, here I'm dealing with Widex. And if I go into my section screen, one of the most important things I want to do is pick the correct receiver strength. You can see here that if I used a high power receiver here on the right side, you can see that I really have too much power here. I just want to pick a receiver that's going to encompass the loss. And even though here, standard still kind of does, I really like medium receivers. It's just a happy medium, especially with Widex. Their standard receivers might sound a little tinny. The moderate receivers bring in just a little bit more bass that will make things sound smooth. The other thing that I want to choose is the right coupler or earpiece, or if you're using a custom, the correct venting. If I use an open fit that will fit most of my patients with this high frequency slope, you can see here I'm not encompassing the lows that have damage here. And the reason why I would be using something like this with a high frequency loss is that I really don't want to give any attention to the lows. The reason for that is that low frequencies are more powerful than highs, and it'll create an upward masking effect, masking out all that clarity that I want to get. The other thing I like with Widex is their tulip domes. Most manufacturers do have tulip domes, some don't, but with Widex, I really like the moderate receiver tulip dome setup. It tends to cover a lot of different types of hearing loss. Going into the fitting, The first thing that we're going to want to do is our feedback test. And you can see here when I was just kind of playing around on this dummy patient, I have a little bit of crossover. Now the one thing I have found with Widex is that crossover is pretty easy to do. Now, they also give a lot of feedback. So, a couple tricks that I'll use. One, even though we don't want any crossover, the one thing is that if you know that you have the right receiver and you know that you have the right dome, it might just not be positioned correctly. I really don't want to start giving somebody a double dome just because of the feedback test. But even when I don't have crossover, sometimes they'll still whistle. And I'll actually go behind the patient and put my hands very close to their ears and then run the feedback test. I won't cover the hearing aids, but I'll just get close enough where I start to hear it whistle, and I'll run the feedback test at that point, and a lot of times I can find success. The other thing with the crossover here is that if I do have crossover and it's very mild, if it's around 6,000 to 8,000, and this is just me, I tend to move on. Most speech clarity is going to be between 1K and 4K. And so I really don't want to see compression there when it's coming to this feedback test, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. And sometimes with Widex this can be a little tricky. Coming into the centigram, I believe this is an older type of Widex, and you can see here that it's only actually doing it on 4 different frequencies. And so I always want to go ahead and do my expanded centigram. The more frequencies, the better when it comes to fine-tuning the hearing aid. And also, this brings me to another point as far as doing your air scores. Years ago, we wouldn't do inner octaves unless there was a gap of 20 decibels between octaves. The thing is hearing aids now have channels for those inner octaves, so there's really no reason not to do it. It will always give you a better fit. But the one thing that I will notice with certain Widexes is that sometimes if I run my centigram, my bass will be way below my target, or way above, depending on how you want to verbalize that. Not only do I not want that to happen, but even because Widex sometimes can run heavy on the bass, I'll actually create a little gap from 500, 250, and 750. I tend to only do my centigram from about 1K out. And it's because it runs a little heavy on the bass, and I find that this sounds a lot more comfortable to the patient if I go ahead and customize this. Not saying it's the right thing to do, but it is what has helped me. The other reason why I definitely want to do this is that what I'm getting in the booth is just my insertion gain, usually with an occluded insert, or if you are using old school headphones, that. But I'm not taking into consideration the open ear response. And this response is how the outer ear canal naturally increases 3,000 hertz. It increases others, but you'll always see this lift right around 3,000. And once I shove a custom hearing aid into the ear or any type of mold, I'm going to disrupt that and kind of flatten that out. And this is what can give an occlusion sound. So running this, I'm taking my insertion gain. I'm taking into consideration the open ear response with the venting that I'm using, and now I have my in situ gain. So this is a trick that I'll use for that. As far as the acclimation goes, I'm really not a fan of this with any manufacturer, but also if you notice it with Widex, as you start to bring it down off of the target, it's not necessarily bringing it down equally. It kind of only tips down the highs. Usually if I find that I have to be more gentle with the patient, I'd rather go into my fine-tuning screen, highlight all the frequencies, and take it down this way. This way I just know that it's being equally done. I'm not really changing the fitting prescription. I'm just taking down some volume. The other thing that I will notice with Widex is that if I do find that the hearing aids are maybe sounding artificial, a lot of times instead of just taking down the gain, which is taking down hearing for them, is that I can highlight my soft sounds. and just bring these down a little bit. This will sometimes take away that artificial sound with the hearing aids. And if things are still very tinny, I like to really try to bring down higher frequencies near the edge or beyond where speech is, because sometimes I can take that edge off without taking away clarity of speech. The other thing that I will do once I start to become comfortable with the manufacturer is I don't necessarily want to highlight a whole channel, soft, medium, and loud, and take that whole thing down. If there is a complaint and I have determined that it's at 2000, I want to ask myself, is it about as loud as conversation would be? Because now that's going to be a medium sound. If I was talking, would their complaint be louder than somebody talking? If so, then I might just want to take down loud sounds at that frequency instead of highlighting the whole channel. Or maybe the sound that they're talking about has to do with newspaper or something that really shouldn't be louder than conversation. I know that this is going to be a soft sound, and now I can start to isolate a lot more. I really don't want to do a lot of fine-tuning because I'm taking them off their prescription. So once I become comfortable and I can really start to isolate where that noise is, then I'm going to have better success. Now, with doing this, if you make a change, and I'm talking about 1 to 2 clicks, and they're not noticing a difference or it's not making it any better, doing it 6 times is not going to solve the problem. You're obviously in the wrong area. So you always want to turn that back. Don't ever, even if it's 1 click and they didn't notice a difference, don't leave it there if it didn't solve the problem. Bring that right back. Like with every manufacturer, you're going to notice that they all kind of have a solution guide or a fitting assistant. The one thing here that I do like when it comes to audibility is sometimes it can really help me with hearing and noise, conversational speech. Owned voice quality hasn't really been too helpful for me. A lot of the times if they're having a problem with their own voice, I have to find out if it's the hearing aid, meaning the program, or is it the venting. And how I do this is that if they're having a problem with themselves sounding occluded, I'll go ahead and mute the hearing aids. If I mute the hearing aids and things still sound occluded, it's not the program, it's the venting. So now I want to start to vent the hearing aid more, open up that vent, maybe change an ear dome. If I turn the hearing aids off and now that occlusion sound has gone away, now I know it's something in my program that I might be able to fix to make it better. Now, with that being said, take that loosely. Changing the fitting will never replace counseling. Again, like I said in the beginning, what they're used to is poor hearing. So when I start bringing back somebody's hearing, it's going to sound abnormal. And therefore, I don't want them to leave my office hearing the same way that they did when they came in. So it's a big thing about counseling, especially in the first week, letting them know, don't wear the hearing aids all day long. Wear them for an hour or 2. Take a break. 2 reasons for this is, 1, we're not used to having foreign bodies in our ear. And so it might tickle, it might itch. If that happens, don't white knuckle through it. Take them out. Take a break. And then with this, it'll also cause them to practice putting in their hearing aids more often because they're taking frequent breaks throughout the day. The log will always tell me during my follow-ups how often the patient has used it, how many times have they changed the program or changed the volume. Changing programs and changing volumes is usually something I don't want to do during the first week. I want to keep things very simple, and I want them to get used to the hearing aid. If I give them volume control and they're constantly turning it down, I've now wasted an entire week. So I do want to keep everything very simple. However, this will also let me know that if somebody's struggling, and then I find out that they're only wearing their hearing aids 2 hours a day, Now I'm back in the counseling seat where I want to perform counseling to let them know that to get used to the hearing aids, we have to start wearing them more often. So this is just a couple of the tricks that I use for Widex. I find with Widex I need to use a lot more tricks than I do with other manufacturers. So I'm just hoping that this video might be able to help somebody. All right, thanks.